Hello, my name is Kevin Lynn, and I'm the Executive Director of Progressives for Immigration Reform. And today is Friday, June 22nd, close of business. And for those who've been on the immigration front, it's been a heck of a week. We saw the Goodlatte Immigration bill go down in flames after a day of debate on the floor. And the onerous, terrible, awful Ryan, they call it the compromise bill, looks like that's been done in by the tweeter-in-chief this morning with one tweet from his mighty Android or iPhone, whatever he uses. So, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for happy hour. But before I go, I'm sure like me, a lot of you were glued to C-SPAN during the Goodlatte bill debate. And I gotta say, I have never been more disappointed with our electeds on either side of the aisle than I have been this week. You know, one side of the aisle, they were following this bizarre Hegelian dialectic of the children. All of it was problem, response, solution. And it seemed to me that how that could derail meaningful discussion and thoughtful debate was beside me. I mean, really, I won't even go into that. I mean, there's a lot of things I want to say about it, but I am not going to do it. And the other side of the aisle, well, shame on them. Calling for more guest workers. Oh, pity the poor employer that can't find a large supply of cheap, easily exploitable labor. So that, what is it? I mean, no one seems to want to pay a living wage anymore. And that's something restricting immigration will happen automatically without any coercion. Now, I wish I had time to provide commentary on everyone who spoke on the floor that day. And later on, I probably will, because certainly there were a number of Congress persons up there that are certainly inviting ridicule, and you know, some actually did a fairly good job. Not many though. But one in particular I'm going to single out, and that is Congresswoman Judy Chu. And I'm doing this because she kind of made the mistake of mischaracterizing the Immigration Reform Act of 1965. And I wanted to point out what I think those mischaracterizations are. You know, like every Democrat that day, Congressman Chu rose in righteous indignation to the attempts at restricting immigration by Republicans. And now, Congressman Chu is from the 27th Congressional District in California, and that's the old district I used to live in. I used to run the Pasadena Democracy for America. So her district is Pasadena and a large chunk of the San Gabriel Valley. And I don't have anything against Congresswoman Chu. I think I had left Pasadena by the time she was installed. She was kind of the shoe-in when Hilda Solis was called to be Secretary of Labor under President Obama. And so she has been there. I think she's been around for 3, maybe 5 terms. I'm not sure at this point. But I want to point these things out because I think it will be instructional for the Congresswoman, her staff, and all of you watching this video.
I now yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today in strong opposition to this cruel anti-immigrant bill. This bill is so bad they even want to destroy legal immigration to this country. For decades, our immigration laws were discriminatory, favoring Nordic and Western Europeans, restricting Italians and Jews, and banning the Chinese completely. Finally, in 1965, during the Civil Rights era, Senator Ted Kennedy ushered in a fair immigration system based on family reunification. Because this system brings families together, immigrant households are less likely to rely on public benefits, and immigrants are also buying homes and starting businesses at a faster rate. But now, with this bill, Republicans are trying to undo that progress and make America white again. Worse, they're tearing families apart to do this. While Trump and Republicans are ripping parents from children at the border, they're trying to do the same through our immigration laws. This war on families must stop.
She was speaking of the 1965 Immigration Reform Act. This act was the first significant piece of immigration reform legislation since the 1924 Johnson-Reed Act. And Ted Kennedy, as you said, was one of the crafters and sponsors of the bill. Now, before I plunge into her statements, I want to talk about the Immigration Reform Act of '65. And I'm going to start off by quoting the late, great liberal senator from Minnesota, Eugene McCarthy. And this is a quote from his book. Let me see, yes, I do have it on my desk. And it is the Colony of the World, the United States Today. It's one of several books he's written. This is actually really difficult to find. I saw it going for a little over $200 used on Amazon. So if you've got it, hold on to it. It's special and precious. Okay, so he stated, the 1965 Act sought to overturn the repugnant aspects of the national origin quota system and replace it with a system which placed all nations on equal footing. He went on to say Congress sought to ensure the number of immigrants entering the United States would not rise appreciably above pre-1965 levels. So what he's saying here, the idea is, the intention of the act was to improve and increase diversity, but not the numbers of immigrants. For instance, the act itself placed a cap of 120,000 on immigrants from the Western Hemisphere, where they had traditionally been pulled from, and a cap of 165,000 from other areas of the world, to include Africa, Latin, South America, Asia. So, now in 1965, for instance, Robert Kennedy was, when he was attorney, or 1964, when he was Attorney General and later a co-sponsor of this bill, he had testified before one of the committees saying, again, the intention is to improve diversity, but not increase the number substantially. Now, that's how it was intended. However, there were a couple amendments put into the act that did either had what you can consider to be unintended consequences or intended consequences. But this is what happened. One of the amendments prioritized family reunification, and with this prioritization, it really tipped the scales and significantly increased the numbers of immigrants admitted each year. McCarthy went on to say in his book that essentially after 1965, the number of immigrants, how we controlled the number of immigrants was placed into private hands. And I'll quote him here. He said, virtually all immigration decisions today are made by private individuals who wish to bring relatives to live in this country. He went on to state further that U.S. immigration policy has become a virtual entitlement to be defended at all costs. When Congress attempted to make some changes that were a little more merit-based, the handful of groups that dominated the immigration flow since 1965 dug in their heels. And then went on to say in his book how Hispanic American, Asian American lobbies they just made it very clear that if you were going to bring in more merit-based, none of the numbers that were provisioned for them would change. So if we're going to bring more merit-based, we simply had to increase the levels of immigration, and that's what's happened. So as a result, the numbers have only increased over the years as new categories have been added and levels added to each of those categories. For instance, last year, 1,183,505 persons obtained lawful permanent resident status. Now that's folks who either obtained a green card, were granted guest worker status, were a refugee, or were naturalized. But getting back to family reunification, in 1965, the number of immediate relative admissions was 33,000. Now, by 1970, that number had more than doubled to 79,213. Now, in 2015, which is the last year I have information on, that number was 465,000. Now, that means it's immediate relative admissions, family reunification, is a large percentage of the total immigrants that come to this country each year. So, back to the assertions made by Congresswoman Chu in her speech on the House floor. She said, "This system brings families together. Immigrant households are less likely to rely on public benefits, and immigrants are also buying homes and starting businesses at a faster rate." Now, this seems to contradict Senator McCarthy, the data, and frankly, the anecdotal evidence that I've accumulated over the last 11 or so years that I've been involved in the immigration debate. But to the credit of Congressman Chu's staff, when I called them and requested to know what the information was that she used to substantiate her claims, they provided me a few links. And the first one was an article dated March 2013, and it's from the conservative-leaning group, the Cato Institute, and it was an article entitled, "Poor Immigrants Use Public Benefits at a Lower Rate Than Poor Native-Born Citizens." It stated, low-income non-citizen children and adults utilize Medicaid, SNAP, cash assistance, and SSI at generally lower rates than comparable low-income native-born citizen adults and children. Okay, so my question right off the bat is, why are you citing an article that is 5 years old? That was 2013. Can't you come up with something a little more recent? My second issue, or my second take on this is, and I'm going to cite a Center for Immigration Studies, CIS article that appeared at about the same year, because I want to compare apples with apples. And in this report by CIS, they stated 21% of immigrants and their U.S.-born children lived in poverty compared to 13% of natives and their children. Moreover, 42% of immigrant-headed households used at least one welfare program compared to 27% for natives. Now, this is a big disparity. This is not, as the Cato Institute characterized it, as generally lower. No, this is the difference between 21% and 13%, and 42% and 27%. Those are big gaps. Also, Congresswoman Chu used as something to substantiate her claims a Marketplace blog dated August 2014, and it was entitled Immigrants Closing the Gap on Home Ownership. The article states that immigrant home ownership is likely to remain lower than native-born home ownership for the foreseeable future, but the gap is narrowing. Well, consider this before blowing your trumpet, striking up the band, and marching down the street in jubilation. And I found another CIS report from 2014 that did talk about home ownership. And in it, CIS reported that 12% of immigrant households were overcrowded. That's overcrowded, compared to just 2% for natives. I mean, this is how immigrant households are getting by in high cost of living areas like Los Angeles County, the 27th Congressional District. Think of that, Congresswoman, the next time you make an assertion like this. Families aren't just doubling up, they're tripling up. And I saw it. I lived in Los Angeles for 20 years before moving to a much lower cost area to live. Now, Congresswoman Judy Chu also stated that immigrants start businesses at a faster rate. And this is correct, they do. All the evidence I've seen seems to indicate that. However, the businesses they do start tend to have fewer employees and lower market caps. So that's what I have to say about that. Now, up to this point, nothing Congressman Chu stated I took exception to. I mean, much like I do, she looked at some information, created some assertions, developed a point of view, and off she went. The one thing I did take exception to was when she stated that Republicans are trying to make America white again. And what she's really saying is not Republicans, but anyone looking to restrict immigration, anyone looking to provide some common sense policies and laws that look to the citizen first before the rights, wants, and needs of the immigrant is somehow a racist. Well, frankly, Congresswoman Chu, I can't think of a more racist remark than the one you made, and I think you should be ashamed of yourself for that. I mean, how far have we gotten from Martin Luther King's statement that people should be judged on the content of their characters and not on the color of their skin? And I'm going to leave it there because it is close of business on a Friday evening now, and I do want to get off to the pub and enjoy happy hour. And in closing, I just want to say, hey, if you enjoyed watching this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you want to be on top of our latest videos and podcasts, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, you can find us on the web at www.pfirdc.org, or you can just spell out progressivesforimmigrationreform.org and donate. It's your donations that allow us to sustain all the good work that we do and bringing some sanity to the immigration debate. Have a great weekend and be safe out there.